Michelle.
Great. Thank you, Shannon, and thank you all for joining us today. My name is Michelle Levy. I'm the Policy and Strategy Director for the Maryland Farmers Market Association. And I just wanted to acknowledge that this webinar is part of a series of workshops and webinars that MDFMA, the Maryland Farmers Market Association, is offering for farmers and producers on how to increase sales through farmers markets. We're also in the process of finalizing a written guide to complement these trainings, so stay tuned. It'll soon be posted and available for download on our website. And this entire farmer training initiative is generously funded through the Rural Maryland Council. So just briefly, an overview of MDFMA for those who aren't familiar. We are a statewide nonprofit founded in late 2012 to provide support to everything farmers market related in Maryland. So that's supporting those who manage, sell through, and shop at Maryland farmers markets. Our core programs is listed here, and more information is available on our website. Are the Maryland Market Money Program, which is a statewide matching program that doubles purchases at farmers markets using federal assistance dollars. We provide food education for consumers, offer insurance for market managers and vendors, and provide technical assistance on all farmers market related matters. So I'm pleased to introduce Ginger Myers, and for you all to have this opportunity to learn from her. Ginger is a marketing specialist at University of Maryland Extension and one of the foremost agricultural marketing experts. Ginger has asked me to share that she'll take questions along the way. So while we'll have brief opportunity for Q&A at the end, please feel free to chime in through the chat box if you have something to ask as she progresses through her slides. But we also want to be mindful of everyone's time. So if your question is especially detailed or specific to your farm or business, please feel free to take down Ginger's contact info and follow up with her directly. I also want to encourage everyone to have paper and pen on hand. Ginger is going to share websites and other resources that will be available when we send out the slides after the fact, but you may want to write them down. So as Shannon noted, the webinar is being recorded. I'll send out the link once it's accessible. We'll also post it on the Maryland Farmers Market Association website and social media, as well as on the Women in Ag page. And in that email, please look for a brief evaluation form. We would greatly appreciate your feedback. So again, thank you for joining us. And without further ado, I turn it over to Ginger.
Well, thank you, Michelle and Shannon, and welcome this afternoon, those who are on, and for those who later see this. I give you kudos for taking the time to research and learn more about the marketing outlets for what you're looking for. The title that you're seeing here on the first slide is actually two presentations, selecting enterprises, because what are you going to market, and then the marketing outlets that fit those. So the presentation, I'm going to spend about a third of my time running through some of those selecting enterprises, because what you have to market really will drive what those outlets are. And then the rest of the time looking at ways to evaluate what outlets match those enterprises and the products you may have more closely. As Michelle was kind enough to reiterate, I do work for the University of Maryland Extension as a marketing specialist. I'm also the director of the Maryland Rural Enterprise Development Center. There is a link to that. Don't go there now, but when you have time, that is a virtual business development center where you can read a lot more about business planning, marketing, finances, contacts to other resources and offices that you may be interested in. I've worked a lot in the past and present with ag entrepreneurs, developing particularly niche and direct markets. Currently working a lot more with new and beginning farmers, which is really exciting. But not to neglect those who've been in the business for a while. These more maturing businesses also need support and opportunities to learn. My husband John and I have a grass-based livestock farm in Westminster, Maryland, and we direct market the products from our farm, which are beef, pork, lamb, chicken, and eggs, direct to the public. 98% of what goes out of our place goes direct to a consumer's hand. So had some hands-on experience, which can be an eye-opener, but also a good way to learn as you go. So hoping to share some of my experiences through this as well as we progress. My first slide asks you if you have financial targets. It seems like that would be a given, but oftentimes when I talk to folks who particularly go into farmers market, they talk about going there for sales, for the experience, get really caught up in, how do I put my booth together? And those are all important things, but I'd ask you to step back and look at your operation first. This is a question I also ask folks when we're talking about writing business plans as a way to get a handle on a target. Um, how much do you need to make, or what is your fiscal target? Perhaps the first couple of years it's just to make sure you're breaking even or progressing slowly, or maybe you're at a point where it's time to scale up because you need to increase that financial target. Now, granted, what you do probably isn't all about making money, but the reality is that your businesses need to be profitable. And to do that, we have to figure out how much do I need to, not just gross, but net. So I often ask you to think about where do I want to be this year? Now, we're getting started down the road here, and I hope you did some of that in January and February, but it's also time before some of the markets get into full swing that you can kind of think, what do I need to make each week at my market? That will also drive how much product do I need to take. So to look at that, how much do I need to make, or what are my goals? We have to step back and look at, well, what are my costs? And we haven't got to a stitch of marketing yet, but I'm going to ask you to think about what are your costs to get your product in the ground, to perhaps the netting, the stakes, some of the other hardware things that you're looking at in your cost of production. Or did you need to buy a plastic layer this year? Or did you need to work with a processor to do a evaluated product? What were some of these costs? The other thing comes, prepping and stocking. If you're going to have a value-added product that you're taking along and you had tomato sauce made from your tomatoes, what's the carrying cost of had that done, and then hold it till you can start getting it to market? And then on product cost, there's always the labor. You're going to hear me talk a lot about labor in the next few slides and in market selection. And I do that because the great leveler for all of us is time. We only have so much time in a day, whether you're growing it in the field or you're taking it to market or you're attending a conference. There's a fixed set of number of hours in a day. So when we start using hours and time, it can be a constant in a written evaluation or a written equation of how to equate where's the most value for the time you're spending. There's actual growing, the time again, labor. I'm sure that most of you think about tracking how long does it take to weed onions versus how long does it take to pick green beans. Do we do that also for the marketing? Do we think about how much time there is in loading the trucks and going and coming back? Then the cost of inputs, whether that's, if you're organic, whether those are special editions or just the regular inputs of new plastic and drip line, there's going to be an input other than just your labor and growing, particularly if you're scaling up. And we know that every seed planted and every head of cabbage isn't going to be perfect for what you need to take to market. You can think of it as shrink or loss, or if you're donating that, but often I hear farmers talk about planting 30% more than they plan to harvest just to cover that. I'd ask you to step back and really think about what that looks like for you. Can you really afford to cover that big of a spread just to ensure that you have the number you want? Or is there more time spent in doing a quality job with what you have? Every operation is going to look at that a little different, but the reality is when you calculate the yields off your 100-foot rows, not all of it's marketable. So there's actual growing cost. And then of course storage, and that can be anything from Do you have a walk-in cooler that you had to build and put maybe a cool bot in, or the crates that you've got to get everything into just to get them in somewhere cool and get the field heat out? I hope that along the way you've been keeping track of some of your expenses and actual numbers. I find that when I talk to folks about growing and producing, they're usually really excited and they know that these are things they need to track. Some have and some haven't yet, but you really need to collect base numbers. Year to year is a great way to build a financial history and to see where you're improving or lessons learned. So we need to track that down. If it's as simple as carrying a little notebook in your pocket and getting the numbers down till you get a chance to get to the house and record them, or if you have a phone app that you particularly like to collect records, we need to get those down and keep those. Again, actual growing, there's a lot of labor, whether you're going to track that by the type of crop, or you're going to buy a season, or buy certain fields. Really, you need to know, where do you spend your time? And then, of course, once we've got it all grown, it's the harvest and processing costs, particularly labor, again, to get this out of the field and somewhere else off your property with money in your pocket. Transportation, whether that's to a processor or wholesale, but also to market. I often run into budgets or farm market costs that don't include the mileage that it took you to get to market and back. Sometimes when you calculate, I know that there's a market away from me that's an 82-mile round trip, and I made it 26 weeks of the year. That's a lot of mileage, and you need to figure out what's the cost of doing that market. We're going to talk about labor, but also those travel expenses. Commissions, if you're going to look at wholesale, or even more for you all, if you're working with maybe a local farm market, or you're working with perhaps providing to another CSA, there's a cost. I put commissions down because oftentimes that's for wholesale or direct sale of product, but think of it as more of the bonus payment to you, or the cost that you might have to pay someone else if you're adding product to your line, or if you're carrying someone else's. And again, labor. I hope you have an idea. Again, how long does it take to pick strawberries and cherry tomatoes versus going out picking peppers? Big difference there along the way. So those are the items, those 3 slides that looked at getting some of your cost under your belt to see what is this cost, because you need the numbers to build a budget. When you're starting to evaluate, should I grow crop A or crop B, there's always some the new hottest and greatest thing, whether you're going to grow, say, fish peppers this year versus King Arthur's. You need to have, what does it usually cost me to produce on a either per foot, per pound basis of my best crop that I do in peppers? Should I replace it with a crop maybe that's maybe really hot right now, but I don't know if I can even grow that? Enterprise budgets are a way to start putting your numbers down on paper. I'm listed an example in this slide of a tomato budget, an extension budget from another state, as just an example. Enterprise budgets, I sometimes get pushback from people saying, oh, those aren't my costs. That's not what it costs to grow it in Maryland. And my comeback is, so you do have numbers of what it's costing you. When you work with, and I get some mumbles after that. But enterprise budgets, one of the things I think they do for you is that they show you items that perhaps you hadn't thought of in that list of cost of production, transportation, the actual growing, and then certainly the processing along the lines, or the harvest cost. So when you work with enterprise budgets, they give you a starting point, not an end point, but a way for you to start saying, oh, that's a really hot, exciting crop, but my goodness, it's just me and a part-time person. I will not have the labor to get it harvested promptly. Or perhaps, I think of some of the great fruit that we have, the berries and all the fresh fruits. There's a meter running the minute you pick that raspberry. So while you can run the budget and it looks good, do you really have those other items of cold storage and quick delivery turnaround time to make those work? So far we've stepped back and said, okay, here's what I need to make. Here's my targets, whether that's, we'll talk about it by the market, by the year, by the field, however you want to do that. Then I've asked you to take a look at what the cost to you is to do that, and use as much data that you collect from your actual production to do it. I know this is like, oh, Ginger, I have so many other things to do, I don't have time to do this. You need to track your budgets, and you need to track your numbers. None of us keep our bank accounts without knowing what the number is that's there. We don't just write checks hoping that it'll get covered. And much the same way, running your business, you need to know your numbers. And so the first part of this presentation has been encouraging you to get a good handle on that, because then you'll know, will markets work for me or not, based on the other costs that we're going to get into now. So I'll take a quick breath. I'm not seeing any questions. I'm trying to watch a little bit, but I also know that time is of the essence, and we're going to keep moving along. One last slide. I talk about enterprise selection. I've really, and I'll use the word harped on getting these numbers, and it needs to happen. But in the end, the enterprise you select often will be about what you're passionate about growing. If you're just really a great greens grower, you're going to do better with that than if I push you over into saying, oh, fish peppers looks good on the numbers. So you do have to follow your passion. That enterprise selection's really going to boil down a lot to how much labor and resources do you have. I mentioned strawberries briefly. That's a wonderful seasonal crop, but on a day like we're having today, at least where I'm located, it rained this morning, the sun's coming out, it's baking everything. Would you have the resources if suddenly those strawberries were 2 weeks ahead and all needed picked? You have to take a look at what can I get done. And of course, labor is back to how many days or how many hours in a day do I have to get it done. I think one thing for all of us who get excited about growing or marketing, and whether that's vegetables, fruit, cheese, ground beef, is that when we have success with one area of a product, we think, oh, we just got to add more and more because customers want more selection. Beware, I think sometimes we have a tendency to over diversify. And once we've started a new planting or a new project, it's hard to give it up because we've invested planning and time in it. But be careful how much you add on for the sake of filling the table, so that it's not about the quantity, variety that you have sometimes. It's about keeping every product on your table the highest quality you possibly can take to market or offer to that restaurant or supermarket or local market that you're having. So getting a really good at producing a quality product makes a lot of this go easier. You get to sort by your time, you get to sort by your passion, and you'll be much more excited when you tell the story of that product when you're passionate about it. A little boilerplate marketing here, the 4 Ps. We've talked about the 4 Ps of marketing for several decades, but it's a good outline. It's held true for very long. It's a traditional approach. There's been some massaging on the tools of this, but it still boils down to a product. And it's got to be a product that a customer wants or needs or satisfies a solution. When folks come up to your booth, they're looking for, what they're going to make for dinner, what they're taking to a picnic, what they're trying to maybe can or preserve for the season. Or the product can also satisfy perhaps their um, desire to shop local or to support local agriculture. Again, I think sometimes those of us who produce get so much in love with our own product that we forget why people buy, that they're actually there to solve a problem for them. And it's our goal to keep them happy, to provide that solution for whatever they're looking for, and to make that personal connection. So product is not just the item itself, but it's much of the experience. Of course, the other P is place. Where are they going to find this? Well, for farmers markets, it's that location. But when you look at all other market outlets, sometimes a farmer's market isn't the most convenient. If it does, it's not big enough to support more of the grocery list, if it's not carrying perhaps cheeses or fruits or another thing, it won't be as convenient for the overall shopper weekly list, but it does provide that wonderful location that, you know, the primal marketing experience that we've had for eons, where there's a face of the producer and a face of the buyer, and this is where it happens. There is just something about a wonderful connection there. I often encourage new producers to go to the market, just to get into a market, just to have that experience of what does it like to do a one-on-one sales? What are people looking for? What are people's buying habits? Why do they come to this place to do that? And if you're thinking about perhaps a farm market back at your location, what would bring them there? The third P, and this is usually the only one where money comes in, the rest of them money goes out pretty much, but price. How how are you going to price your items? What does your price say? What does it reflect? We could do a whole session just on setting price alone, but we certainly know that the baseline price, you have got to know back on those earlier slides, what was your cost of production, harvest, and marketing to get it to where you're going to have it on the table. Those are all pieces that have to work for you. So sometimes I see some producers, walk the market and see what other people are pricing things, and they come back and they start to write up their own price tickets. Um, you don't know the experiences or the inputs of those others. So you don't know if perhaps, they're not paying a land rent that you have to pay, or perhaps, they're working with a sibling somewhere on another farm that's really good at growing those peppers. You have got to step back on price and know your cost. Then from there, I have said, I used the word marketplace here, reflect the marketplace. We all know that different markets support different prices in reality. Some of the more urban markets, and I'll use the example of DuPont Square, or DuPont Circle, I'm sorry, that's almost a market economy unto itself. The pricing at that market reflects a different location, a different shopper, a different disposable income than, say, a market, and I'll use my own home markets, Carroll County. Marketplace, you need to understand what the market will bear wherever you are. Often use the example of selling beets in Howard County versus Carroll County. In Howard County, those folks are looking at, smaller specialty beets that have a higher price tag than perhaps the beets in Carroll County, where they're looking at tennis balls to softball size beets, and beets are a pretty common product. You can't get the same price. But in all the pricing, it goes back to you need to make a profit. You will work too hard and too long not to price product for a profit when you go home in a day. The final of the 4 P's has to do with promotion. And this has probably changed more in the last decade than any of the other P's because of the way we're communicating, the way we're using social media, Um, Group marketing, we have the, your Maryland Farmers Market Association now does promotion that none of you can get done individually. The signage, there's a lot more community buy-in to help promote that. But again, it will fall to you to promote your own farm operation, your own product, and to be a friendly, open, transparent producer with your customers. Nobody likes the guy who sits on the tailgate of his truck on Saturday morning reading the paper and just having his product set out on the table. And I still see that at farmers markets. The people that aren't up and greeting and friendly and open, or when the market slows down, the person who sits back in the chair and pulls out a book to read. The promotion there is, I'm too busy or I'm too bored to take care of you. Promotion really speaks to anything from the way you're dressed, to the way you greet customers, to how you're going to reach out on your Facebook page or your ad or your community, perhaps fair or community markets. Promotion is not always a big ticket item unless you're going to do a lot of printed material or perhaps radio ads, but it is something that will require as much time as any of the other three combined. You need to keep that in mind, that you are continually promoting local food because that helps all of us, but you're also promoting the concept of buying directly from farmers, and then of course your own operation. I added a fifth P, which is called positioning, and that's where you have the opportunity in market to sort of set yourself apart. I often use the example of Stihl, that's S-T-I-H-L, Stihl chainsaws. Stihl chainsaws are a very good brand of chainsaws, but they position themselves that they are not available in a big box store like Home Depot or Lowe's. They only are sold through dealers where there's other farm implements, maybe mowers and so forth. They've positioned themselves as a specialty tool, and consequently they do command a little better price because they're not something that's going to be a knockoff in the big boxes. Positioning for you may be anything from how you grow your product, specializing perhaps in you're the tomato lady or the garlic guy, or you're the lady with all the recipes every week, or the gentleman who knows everything about honey and bees. Think of that as sort of what differentiates you from the booth next to you or the booth across from you. It needs to be part of your story, and when I talk about your story, I'm talking about what is behind what you do. Perhaps you're on a new farm. Perhaps you're trying to take over your grandparents' farm and get it going. Perhaps you're saying, I only want to market direct to my neighbors. This is an area you need to think about. The others you'll be driven into because just running a business, you got to have a product where you're going to sell and how you're going to promote. But positioning's where you get to use your creativity and you get to dream a little bit about, what is my farm and who am I and why do I do this? And that's as much a part of marketing as the other 4 P's are above. Okay, I'm going to switch gears here a little bit now. Want to make sure I honor the time and get through where we're doing a little more evaluation here. I'm not seeing any questions yet, so maybe we're holding them till the end. How do you evaluate all these markets? Where should you spend your time? I've told you only have so much, and there's more emerging markets all the time. It seems, we had farmers markets, but some of you are going to do restaurants and CSAs and maybe even work with some of the pick your owns or a farm stand. So where should you spend that time and how should you do that? Well, I worked with Matt LaRoe at Cornell, and we took a look at how would you make these decisions? Like what impacts the performance of a marketing channel? What makes it work? Well, one of them is risk. If you go to a market and it rains and nobody comes, then what happens? So our farmers markets, how do we evaluate that? What about the labor requirements? What if you're going to market, you're going to pick, you're going to chill, you're going to pack. That's nothing to say about what time you're going to spend there. You might tell yourself, again, it's only 2 hours a week for me to run to this little local market. Look at the two red ones here behind here, the risk and the labor. So even though it's not a big time commitment, um, if it's only 2 hours though, how much sales can you have in 2 hours? So you have to ask yourself that. Um, there are, every market has some kind of associated cost, whether it's a booth space, perhaps it's also insurance, it's also your tent, tables, signage, all those kinds of things. And how much can you make in an hour? Can you sell? I use the number here, $300 per hour. If you're by yourself trying to sell vegetables, that's a tall order to do, unless you've got some really high value products. So you may be back down to, on those labor requirements, I have to take somebody along to help. So when you start looking at a marketing channel, and I will tell you, one of the reasons people go wholesale is they look at these 5 items and say, I can't cover that. I can produce and have less labor requirements to sell volume. Or some people look at this and say, this is really where I think I need to be, and I can sell $300 an hour, or I can sell $500 an hour. If you're selling, steaks at a market, that's a little more doable than, tomatoes at how many, so much a pound. Then there's this one other little caveat called lifestyle preferences. I've talked to some folks who absolutely do not want to do farmers markets because they're not really people persons. They're not comfortable with somebody coming in, squeezing the tomatoes and telling them, oh, I could grow these at home, and then sitting it back down in the box and walking. That's not them. Or perhaps they don't want to do farmers markets on Sundays because that's a day that they've traditionally taken off. Or perhaps the idea of being in a market with everybody else what seems to be growing the same thing just doesn't work for them. So sometimes why people pick where they market and how is lifestyle, or I call it a personality preference. And each of you will have to evaluate that as to how it applies to you or your partner or someone else in your operation who's going to be doing this market. So back to also when we talked about price, where's your financial targets or fiscal target? It's also, what's important to you. And this little graph, and you will have a PDF of this, so some of these slides are a little more detailed. You can print off the PDF and take a look at it. Talks about the advantages, disadvantages of anything from wholesale, where you're going to grow big patch of pumpkins, you're going to go to harvest them, put them in the bins, and take them to the auction, versus selling all those, say, pumpkins again, direct from the farm during the Halloween season. There are pros and advantages in each of these categories: crop, how much you have to work with the customer, what your prices and volume are. What is not on this slide is that last lifestyle preferences. For some folks, because of how they're handling their production, doing the pumpkins in a big slug, getting them harvested and done, is what they choose to do, particularly because of labor cost. And again, because they're growing a lot of pumpkins, they're trying for maximum production with a minimum amount of labor and time in marketing. If you can provide more time, more intensity, you'll see that the pricing is higher for direct, but it also takes a lot more time and certainly almost more interaction with customers and knowledge of your product, particularly how to use it. When you start to do direct marketing, like a farmer's market, people are going to ask you about recipes. In my own experience, we sell whole frozen chickens at our farmers markets. I'm surprised how many people ask me how to cook a whole chicken. They're so used to buying chickens in parts that I have to walk them through how to crock pot a chicken. So again, a lot more income opportunity, I should say, um, dollar opportunity at least, direct, but it does require a lot more time, labor, and interaction, certainly with your audience. The next few slides get a little more detailed, and I'm going to try to walk through them a little slow so that you can kind of do the calculations on the side. Muddy Fingers Farm is a farm up in New York State, and the county is now eluding me as I talk here today. But again, I worked with Matt LaRoe at Cornell, and this was pretty much typical CSA farm that did farmers markets and restaurants like many of the smaller operations we have in Maryland. They grew vegetables and fruit. The fruit were brambles and strawberries, and they went to farmers markets. They ran a CSA. They did not have paid labor. It was a husband and wife team, but they did have family and friends. You know how we all kind of suck in our family or people that can help us get things done. And they had some working shares. They had 2.5 acres of production, not real big, but certainly big enough for no paid labor. And they were working on about 45 different crops. Now, within that 45 different crops, there were several different varieties of some of the crops, such as in the tomatoes. So Muddy Fingers we looked at because they came to Matt and said, we've got too many markets that we're working on. We need to drop something. We just cannot get this all done. But we're not sure. I mean, we like them all. Help us evaluate where should we put our time. So I have been talking to you about labor and hours and costs right along because the methodology that Matt and I decided that would work, we were looking for a constant across everything, was labor. And we asked the folks at Muddy Fingers to work with their people to collect the labor that was involved to get to a sale of a product at a farmer's market. But it wasn't realistic to do it the whole season. Plus, remember, they had volunteer help. The people who were actually going to collect this were the husband and wife and 2 other of their market attendees, because we could trust they could get these numbers down. So they picked 1 week, a typical week, but they did it in peak season when it took the most time and effort to write down in what we called the market labor log, anything from how long it took to harvest, the packing, the transportation, and the time it's marketing. When we sit at the market for several hours, the clock's burning the whole time. Then we also collected the gross sales for that week and the mileage for the week. We asked the couple to look at lifestyle and risk, and I'll talk about that because we kind of developed a little weighted measure for them to use, because they picked this out, what was going to be lifestyle attributes they wanted, and risk-wise, they knew their production capabilities. So we let them come up with some categories. And again, we collected their ranking. So I know this isn't easy to follow in just text. That's why at the end you're going to have a link to Matt's workbook that he and some other folks at Cornell put together that will actually give you copies of the worksheets for this. It's pretty easy if you just make some columns with the number of hours to harvest, pack, transport, and sales, those 4 figures, gross sales at the end of the day, and the mileage. And I'll show you then a little more about how that worked. Again, we chose labor laws because it was a consistent unit that we could put across Muddy Fingers Farm, but for any farm, there's a lot of if, ands, buts. How do you attribute the tractor in your enterprise budget? We didn't want to get weighed down with, how do we put in so many tables for this market versus that market? You really needed to see how much money you could make in hours, what this boiled down to. It gave you an idea of where you're spending your time, because again, all of us only have so much. So it was a consistent unit. The operators told their help how to complete the form, and each one had their own sheets. Um, Again, whether people can have a little log that they keep for that week, and you give them the forms and they just write hours in. But you really only need it for 1, maybe 2 weeks if you're afraid that somebody missed something. So um, you want to capture that. And just real close, what we did is we took the gross sales, everything that came in. We added, we gave the labor a unit, like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. You added up how many units plus the mileage cost, and you did a division of the sales volume to give you a percentage. I'm going to show you a chart. Again, I know this slide's a little detailed. The math is really much easier than the words there. And then we asked the farmer to give some ranking about how do you feel about this? How do you feel about going to farmers markets, knowing that some summers every other Tuesday it's going to rain, it seems like, or is farmers market or this market outlet really stressful? Does your CSA really trip your trigger when you can't find enough good of your best quality for that because you're really trying to get some of that to market? So those are things that we put in as a perception ranking. But what you really need to look at, we looked at gross sales minus labor and mileage. Different than production cost, certainly, but we're not looking for net profitable per unit. We're looking at evaluating how much time each of these market outlets take, and coupling with that, basically, do you like that kind of market? Whether it's a CSA or restaurant or farm market stand. And what we found when we did a comparison for Muddy Fingers, they had a farmer's market, a Corning farmer's market. They had another, and we used initials for these places, a market that was a Tuesday, Saturday market in the same location. Anything that says FM was a farmer's market. And then hours to pack their CSA each week, and the harvest and packing time for restaurants. The total labor hours only had to do with harvest and packing and getting the product out the door. So you can see how they what they did in weekly labor. Then we asked, they tracked gross sales for the 1 week, percentage of all the sales. So you can see this comparison. It's real easy to see that for the amount of time they put in to do their CSA, for the sales they had, looks like a pretty good marketing channel for them. Some folks are leery of doing CSAs. They're afraid perhaps they won't be able to produce enough, or they'll have a crop problem, or they're not real keen about doing the marketing for CSA members. Lots of reasons you might not want to, but certainly CSAs have been very strong. They're still strong in Maryland. They provide a lot of upfront money, and certainly for the time, because most of the time your packing and pickup is either at a market or at your farm, so you're not running the roads or spending a whole lot more time at the table getting that sold. You can take a look at some of these other percentages. The restaurant percentage was about a wash. We couldn't say, well, you should give that up or not give it up. It's basically, it was a 1-for-1. But they were really looking to drop a farmer's market. And we looked at Watkins, it's Watson Glen market for them, that it was taken, more than 10%, close to 15% of their time to do this little market, that 5% of the gross sales for the week. So this came forward real quick that this was the market that we recommended they drop, because it didn't seem to make sense for the time, the labor, compared to others. And they could take that 13% and put it back in somewhere else, whether that was at one of the other farmers markets, or have a little extra time to get some other things done. Again, this was kind of just the calculations that we went through on coming up with where should you spend your time for profit. This is a bar graph looking at basically the percentage of profit for gross sales on the labor that you had. It's another way of looking at the graph. Then we asked the farmers, okay, here's what we're seeing for time for your labor and your percentage of sales. These are other factors that you want to consider. Your restaurant sales. What if the buyer backs out? That's a risk. Are you willing to put more time in if we drop one of the markets back into perhaps work in those restaurants a little bit? Perhaps one of the risks is you're going to grow more tomatoes. Do you look for a processor? On a pick your own, there's certainly, going to have people on your farm. Some of the preferences were, you're going to have time for interaction. Perhaps you have a really good wash and pack system that really would be best if you could crank out more for markets. Or how do you want to display them? These are some of the other weighted items that you might want to consider. So we had the profitability. I'm going to back up real quick here because back to this slide where we talked about Watkins Glen, the weekly labor, gross sales. We went through those preferences and the risk of the market. Yeah, you're already got a good wash and pack area, but geez, you only get 5% of the sales. So we thought it was a pretty clean recommendation that they drop Watkins. And they nodded their heads at the table at the time, and we were surprised when they said to us, yes, we understand at Watkins is not our most profitable market, but it was the first market we ever got into. And the people there are so nice and they're such loyal customers. They chose, back to those preferences and risks and lifestyle preferences, they chose to keep Watkins. And instead, they took out, of all things, they took out their Tuesday market because they wanted the customers to shift over to Saturday when they had more help from some adult children that came back to help them market. So the story here is that the numbers will give you an evaluation of where you could market. We didn't have a pick your own to put in this example, but it's pretty a relevant example for most veggie growers who are looking at multiple outlets. Perhaps we would have looked different at a pick your own, but while the numbers showed us that truly they should have taken out Watkins, because of their personal preferences, back to that, what is passion, what is important to you, what makes a difference, why would you keep a market, they truly enjoyed the time they went to Watkins. They liked the people, they understood it was a lower market. So in the end, you have to also select markets that you're happy doing, and that though being fully knowledgeable that perhaps you're leaving some profit on the table there that you need to make up somewhere else. So back to knowing your numbers helps you to make much more calculated decisions based not just on cost but also your preferences, so that you get a better total picture of what your market can do for you. So back to this channel assessment, as I'm saying, identify your goals and your lifestyle preferences. This is a lot of hard work. You should be happy and satisfied when you're done at the end of the day, and some of this can do that. You need to keep the cost and returns record, even if it's, during the start of the season, somewhere in the middle. We like to use the peak times because that's when you're usually pushed through the thinnest and need to really allocate labor correctly. One of the things you do need to is put your own time to put an accurate picture. So often I look at enterprise budgets or business plans where the owner is not quote unquote paying themselves, but you need to know what is the value of you in your operation to really get an accurate picture of those marketing costs. So that you know if you can grow, if this can be a full-time business, or if this can support you. Or the other thing, if something were to come up and you would have to miss a couple weeks, maybe for surgery or something, what would it cost to hire someone who could fill in for you? You need that number. And then the ability to compare opportunities. In the beginning, many folks you'll try them all because they don't know what's going to hit, but at some point you need to weed them down. Muddy Fingers knew they couldn't do all that they wanted to in these markets, too many, and having a look at where the profitability was, they chose a market that didn't hurt them a lot to leave. It didn't help to keep it a lot, but their personal lifestyle preferences dictated that. And in reality, if you can combine some channels, perhaps your farmer's market is an outlet, but you're also working with a buyer who's looking for processing product, another producer that's looking for processing tomatoes. I've recently seen a lot of salsas and hot sauces are showing up on the market. Particularly, I see it in the Baltimore area, and many of those are from producers who are buying, the excess, maybe peppers and onions or tomatoes to make these sauces. So there are some combination outlets, markets that way that you can look to spread your risk. Successful marketing, it is a lot of risk, but it's the only way you're going to get successful, that you're going to grow, and not just in your wallet, but in your skills as a producer, as your value as a part of the farm and production community, and be very happy with what you're doing. So with that, I'm going to say that we do have some resources. That guide to marketing channels, that is a fact sheet page that is no longer active. I think, again, over on the web links, there is an active link there, that guide to marketing channels. It's now under the Cornell Small Farm Projects. The ag marketing website that's listed here is a website that I maintain for Extension that's got a lot more about direct markets and, again, follow-up material on pricing, enterprise selection, and of some of the work on displays at markets and so forth. And then, again, the guide that's there. And the other thing you can do is attend all these workshops, work with the Maryland Farmers Market Association. They're putting together some great resources through this grant and are doing more of these kinds of webinars. So take the time to reach out and learn like you did today. With that, if there's any other questions, I want to honor the time. If not, I'm going to thank you for your time. Also, feel free to contact me. If you go to my website, you'll find the connections there. Some things around, we're asking if you could, for me, there is a teaching evaluation. The university constantly tries to help us be better instructors, and with that, we can do that with feedback from you. That's a link that's got about 5 questions about today's presentation. There'll be a drop-down box where you find my name, and just the program topic is marketing outlets. And then I think also that Michelle had some follow-up to take care of too.
Great. Thank you so much, Ginger, and thank you everyone who joined us this afternoon. As we mentioned in the beginning, we'll follow up with the link to the webinar recording, to Ginger's Teaching Effectiveness Survey, and a brief feedback link that shouldn't take more than a minute to complete. We'd just love to let the Rural Maryland Council know that people are learning from this webinar series. So with that, unless there are any final questions, we'll say thank you, and please be in touch directly with any additional follow-up. Have a great afternoon.